Organized crime. It's a term we hear a lot, often brings movie scenes to mind, right?
Absolutely. But the reality behind it is, well, it's a persistent force, incredibly adaptable, and it's challenged societies for really generations.
And understanding how these networks actually work, how law enforcement tries to get inside them, and what happens long term. It gives you crucial insights. It's a hidden threat.
hmm And what we're exploring today is, frankly, one of the most audacious, most impactful operations the FBI ever undertook. A really deep dive into the mafia world.
Lessons learned back then, they still shape how we understand organized crime today, how we try to combat it. So it's a story with enduring relevance, you could say.
Definitely. You know, for a long time, the whole idea of putting an agent deep inside, undercover for years,
Oh.
law enforcement was very cautious, especially the FBI under Hoover.
Why was that? The risk.
Primarily, the risk of corruption, the fear that an agent living that life day in, day out might get compromised, maybe even start thinking like the criminals they're investigating.
It seems strange now because it's such a key tactic.
It does, but back then, the concern was very real. Eventually, though, they realized that just relying on, outside informants had its limits.
Right. You needed someone inside,
Yeah.
seeing things firsthand.
Exactly. The potential value was just too high to ignore, and that shift in thinking, well, it paved the way for operations like the one involving Joseph Pistone.
Pistone. What made him the right fit for something so incredibly risky?
Well, he had this unique combination of skills and background. He spoke fluent Italian, Sicilian heritage that gave him an immediate cultural in, you could say.
More than just language, then.
Oh, yeah. He grew up in an area where mafia culture was, well, present. So he had this intuitive grasp of their customs, their behaviors. That's vital for building trust in such a closed-off world. You can't fake that easily.
So they create this identity for him. Donnie Brasco.
Meticulously. It wasn't just a name. It was a whole life story, a low-level jewel thief trying to work his way up.
And the Bureau backed this up.
They went all out, even sent Pistone to gemology courses, FBI training, so he could talk the talk, make the cover totally believable. This wasn't just a disguise. It was meant to hold up under intense scrutiny.
Incredible. And this operation, Sun Apple, it wasn't small scale.
Not at all. Simultaneous operations running in Miami and New York. Initially, the plan was just maybe 6 months.
6 months. It ended up being much longer.
Years longer. Pistone was just that successful at gaining trust. The intelligence he was gathering was invaluable.
And the FBI's commitment.
Absolutely. Joseph Pistone, his real identity, was basically wiped from FBI records, off the office rolls, personnel files, everything. Most of his colleagues had no idea what he was truly doing. Extreme secrecy, extreme danger.
What was the initial way in? How did they plan for him to make contact?
The initial focus was on getting into the mafia's world through their connections to stolen goods. So targeting fences, truck hijacking rings, establish routes into their broader criminal world.
And this wasn't happening in a vacuum, right? The mafia itself was going through changes.
Exactly. It was a period of major internal power struggles.
Yeah.
Very volatile. Alliances were shifting constantly.
Which made Pistone's intel even more critical, I suppose. Real-time insight into chaos.
Precisely. He wasn't just observing a static organization, he was inside a world in constant upheaval.
So how did he climb the ladder? How did Donnie Brasco get accepted?
It was gradual, building relationships, proving he was reliable, an earner. He started with Jilly Greca's crew, Colombo family, involved in hijackings, robberies.
Okay.
Then, after about 6 months, he shifted focus strategically towards the Bonanno family, made a connection with a guy named Anthony Mira.
And that stuck.
Well, Mira eventually got locked up. So Pistone then came under the wing of Benjamin Lefty Ruggiero, who was a soldier reporting up the chain. He even had dealings with the Milwaukee family at one point. Then, after a big power shift in the Bonannos around 79, he started reporting directly to a captain, Dominic Sonny Black Napolitano.
And he had a legitimate front, too, right? To explain his presence.
Yeah, to solidify the cover, he helped set up a seemingly legit business in Florida, the King's Court Bottle Club.
Ah, okay. Gave him a plausible reason to be around, interact, without everything looking overtly criminal.
Exactly. It's about creating that believable everyday existence within their world.
And he got incredibly close. Napolitano trusted him implicitly.
To an extraordinary degree. Napolitano actually told Pistone he intended to propose him for official membership in the Bonanno family, to become a made man.
Wow. That's huge.
It is. And as a final test, or maybe a demonstration of that trust, Napolitano gave Pistone a murder contract, told him to kill Anthony Bruno and Delicato.
He was asked to commit murder.
Yes. That really underscored just how deep he was, how much trust Napolitano had put in Donnie Brasco, and frankly, how precarious the whole operation had become.
So when his cover was finally blown, the fallout must have been immense.
Oh, it sent shockwaves. Immediately, a $500,000 contract was put on Pistone's life.
$500,000.
And the Bonanno family, they paid a huge price within the mafia structure. They were expelled from the Mafia Commission, the ruling council, basically. A massive punishment showing just how damaging Pistone's infiltration was seen to be.
Did they try to carry out the contract?
Well, interestingly, the FBI took a really unusual step. They directly intervened, essentially advising key mafia bosses not to kill a federal agent.
The FBI warned the mafia.
Yes. That, combined with the understanding within the commission that killing an agent would bring down unbearable heat. Well, the contract was eventually dropped. Pragmatic, perhaps, from their side, but it saved Pistone's life.
And then came the trials. Pistone testified publicly.
Starting in August '82, yeah. And the evidence he'd gathered over those 6 years, it was devastating.
What was the final tally?
Over 200 indictments, more than 100 convictions of mafia members, a really significant blow.
But there was a strange twist for the Bonanno family, wasn't there?
There was a kind of paradoxical outcome. While Pistone's work decimated their ranks initially, being kicked off the commission actually saved them from something bigger.
How so?
They weren't included in the big mafia commission trial that happened later, which took down the leadership of the other major families. So the Bonannos, ironically, kept a more intact leadership structure.
Which allowed them to rebuild eventually.
Exactly. It contributed to their resurgence later under Joseph Messina. It's a stark reminder that even really successful operations can have complex, unforeseen consequences.
Right. You solve one problem, maybe create space for another down the line.
And years later, Messina himself was convicted, one of the charges, ordering the murder of Sonny Black Napolitano specifically because he'd let Pistone infiltrate the family. A grim final chapter.
Even after Pistone left the FBI, the story wasn't over for him, personally.
Not by a long shot. He left the Bureau in '86, wrote books about his experiences, Donnie Brasco, My Undercover Life in the Mafia being the most famous, which became that big movie. He also worked on other mafia-related film projects.
But the danger remained.
Absolutely. Constant threats, the need for security. He and his family had to move multiple times, even while he was still being called to testify in various cases. His life was just permanently altered by that world he entered.
His legacy, though, within law enforcement, it's undeniable.
Completely pioneering. He proved the effectiveness of that long-term, deep cover work. It fundamentally changed the FBI's approach to tackling organized crime. More immersive, higher risk, yes, but the results were unprecedented.
What did his testimony reveal about the day-to-day life inside, the subculture?
One thing he really stressed was the constant, relentless focus on making money. The next score. It dominated everything.
So less like the romanticized movie version.
Far less. He painted a picture of, treachery, betrayal, bursts of violence, but also, surprisingly, a lot of just boredom.
Yeah.
Waiting around. It wasn't glamorous. It was a grind focused on illicit profit.
And the structure. How did they operate?
The crew structure was key. Small, isolated cells, and a very strict need-to-know policy.
So guys in one crew wouldn't know much about other crews, even in the same family.
Often, very little. That compartmentalization made it incredibly difficult for undercover agents like him, and for law enforcement in general, to get the bigger picture. It's a structure you see in other illicit networks too, actually.
It sounds very controlled internally, though.
Highly. Constant reporting up the chain. You had to report your activities to your captain, the wise guy in charge. Couldn't just take time off without approval. Every potential score, every move had to be run by them. It's regimented in its own criminal way.
Did Pistone notice any changes happening within the mafia during his time?
He did. He saw this generational shift starting. The older guys, steeped in tradition, kinship. They were aging out, being replaced by younger guys, maybe late 20s, early 30s.
And they were different.
Less tied to the old codes, it seemed. More focused on individual profit, my thing, rather than the collective our thing, the family or crew. The older guys worried about this, saw it as a kind of erosion of their values, maybe an Americanization of sorts.
We certainly see more high-ranking figures incarcerated now.
We do, and those are major wins for law enforcement. But, you have to be careful thinking that means the end of organized crime.
Because there are always replacements.
There's a large pool of potential replacements, yes. And other groups emerge, sometimes ones with more recent international ties who might actually stick closer to older, stricter traditions. It's an ongoing cycle of adaptation.
How do they view violence internally? Pistone shed light on that.
Yeah, his insights there were interesting. Violence within their own ranks. While serious, it was often seen as, well, a tool of the trade, enforcing rules, settling disputes, part of business.
Different from how they viewed violence against outsiders.
Very different. And maybe surprisingly, he noted they had this kind of grudging admiration for the American free enterprise system.
Really? Why?
Because it created the environment where they could make huge illicit profits. They saw the opportunity.
But they weren't necessarily good at managing that profit long term.
Often not. He described a tendency to live for the moment, spend the money quickly rather than making long-term investments. Flashy lifestyles, often.
Any other destabilizing factors he noticed?
He pointed to the growing drug problem, especially among the younger generation, as something really corrosive, weakening the traditional bonds, the old values.
And on the other side, law enforcement strategies have evolved too, right?
Undeniably. Things like the RICO statute have been huge, allowing them to target the leadership, the entire enterprise, not just foot soldiers.
And the criminals adapt too.
Always. We see more diversification in their activities now, and a big trend is investing dirty money into legitimate businesses, trying to launder it and expand their influence that way.
Informants and undercover agents, still the key tools.
Still crucial, yes. Both have pros and cons. Informants can be cost-effective for initial intel, but reliability, credibility, that's always an issue. They have their own motivations.
And we are seeing more high-level guys become informants.
We are. Longer sentences, witness protection options, maybe less loyalty to the old codes. It all plays a part. But managing informants, deciding what concessions they get, that remains really complex and sometimes controversial.
Undercover work, like Pistone's, avoids some of that credibility issue, but the risks.
The risks are immense, and it's incredibly resource intensive. But as the Pistone case showed, the potential payoff in terms of dismantling organizations and securing convictions can be massive.
What about other sources of information? Are we missing things?
Well, the experiences of victims of organized crime, that's often an underutilized resource. Their accounts can provide really critical detail.
It's just basic data collection.
Improving that could make a big difference. Just systematically noting, say, in police reports, if there's any indication a crime involved a group or network, that helps build a clearer picture over time.
Are there tools to predict where organized crime might flourish?
Yes, risk assessment instruments are becoming more valuable. They analyze factors like economic opportunities, the existing criminal environment in an area, whether certain specialized skills or access are needed for particular crimes.
What kinds of crimes typically fall under organized crime?
You can broadly categorize them. Providing illicit goods like drugs or weapons, providing illicit services like gambling or loan sharking. And then there's the infiltration of legitimate businesses we mentioned earlier.
Can changes in law actually create opportunities for them?
Sometimes, inadvertently. Take cigarette smuggling, for example. If taxes go way up in one area, it creates a huge profit motive for smuggling cheaper cigarettes from elsewhere. That's a classic organized crime opportunity. And other factors matter too, right? Like location, history.
Definitely. Things like geographic location, being near a border, for instance, local history, even cultural traditions can make an area more susceptible or create specific types of opportunities for these groups. These are exacerbating factors. So it's clear that organized crime is persistent. It adapts.
It really does. And looking back at operations like Pistone's, understanding the history, the successes, the failures, the unintended consequences, it's critical for figuring out how to deal with it now and in the future.
Which brings us to the ongoing challenge. How will these groups continue to evolve? How will law enforcement strategies need to change in response? What new forms might organized crime take as society itself changes? Thinking about that history gives you a framework, but the future trajectory? That remains a really complex question.